Hi friends, and welcome back to the Grace-Filled Classroom. I'm Keisha, and I'm really glad you're here today. If you're a parent, a homeschool parent, or a teacher who has ever thought, I know they understand this, so why isn't it showing up on paper? This episode is for you. Because this is one of the most confusing and honestly discouraging places to sit as a caring adult. You see the understanding, you hear it in their words, you watch it come out in conversation, play, explanations, and then the worksheet, the test, the writing assignment comes out, and suddenly it's like everything disappears, and you're left wondering, am I missing something? Are they really understanding? Or am I failing them somehow? Take a breath and let's talk about what's actually going on. So if episode 13 was about how learning styles matter and episode 14 was about capacity and overwhelm, then today we're talking about what happens when understanding is there, but the format doesn't match the learner. This is where it all comes together. I want to start by saying this clearly right from the beginning. When understanding doesn't show up on paper, it does not mean understanding isn't there. And that distinction alone changes everything. Here's something we don't talk about enough. Understanding and output are not the same thing. Paper is not proof of intelligence. Paper is not proof of comprehension. Paper is a translation tool. And for many kids, especially sensitive kids, creative kids, perfectionist kids, or kids with strong verbal or hands-on learning styles, that translation process is where things fall apart. They know it. But getting it out in the approved format is the hard part. And then the worksheet, the test, the writing assignment comes out, and suddenly it's like everything disappears. I remember sitting across from my daughter one afternoon watching her explain a concept perfectly out loud, and then stare at a blank page. Same brain, same understanding, completely different output. And in that moment I realized, okay, this wasn't about ability, it was about channel. When we only accept written output as evidence of learning, we miss so much of what's actually happening inside our children. Understanding is often invisible long before it becomes visible. So if it's not laziness, and it's not defiance, and it's not a lack of effort, what is going on? Let's talk through a few very common reasons understanding doesn't show up on paper. First, learning style mismatch. Some kids process best through talking, movement, visual, or hands-on experiences. When we ask them to immediately convert that understanding into writing, especially under pressure, it's like asking them to switch languages mid-sentence. And second, performance anxiety or perfectionism. Who can relate to that? Many kids freeze on paper because paper feels permanent. They're afraid to be wrong. They're afraid it won't sound as good as it does in their head, so they shut down. And third, developmental gaps. This is huge, especially in late elementary and middle school. A child can understand complex ideas long before their writing stamina, fine motor skills, or organization skills can catch up. And finally, confidence and motivation are deeply connected. When kids repeatedly feel like their understanding doesn't count unless it looks a certain way, motivation drops. Not because they don't care, but because they feel unseen. And this is where I want to gently pause and offer a grace reset. If this is your child, you are not failing them. If this is your student, you are not doing something wrong. This isn't a discipline issue. This isn't a character flaw. This is just information, right? Information that tells us how this child learns and where they need support, not pressure. I'm reminded here of how often Scripture reminds us that God looks beyond what's visible. God looks at the heart, not the outward appearance. Growth doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it happens quietly, underground, like roots forming before anything breaks through the surface. And just because fruit isn't visible yet, doesn't mean nothing is growing. So the million-dollar question here is, what do we do with this information? How do we respond in a way that protects confidence and supports learning? Well, here are a few gentle shifts you can try. No curriculum overhaul required. First, accept other forms of evidence. I've talked about this multiple times before. Ask them to explain it out loud before they ever pick up a pencil. Let them draw it. Let them act it out. Let them teach you. Understanding does not disappear just because it isn't written. And second, separate understanding from writing practice. Writing is its own separate skill. It requires stamina, organization, fine motor control, sequencing. And sometimes what looks like a content gap is actually a writing fatigue gap. And teach writing as writing, not as proof of intelligence. Third, name what you see. Say things like, I can hear that you understand this, even if writing feels hard right now. That sentence alone can restore so much confidence. It tells a child, your brain is working, we're just building the bridge. And finally, slow down the translation process. Paper is a tool, not a verdict. Understanding does not have to instantly become written proof to be real. If you're sitting in that tension right now, loving a child whose learning doesn't always look traditional, I want you to hear this. Understanding doesn't disappear just because it doesn't show up on paper. Sometimes it just needs a different doorway to come through. If this conversation matters to you, would you just take a moment to like or subscribe wherever you're listening? It helps more families find these conversations, and it means more than you know. And if you know a parent watching understanding show up everywhere except on paper, share this episode with them. Understanding is invisible long before it becomes visible. Paper measures production. It does not measure understanding. So if learning feels stuck this week, pause before you panic. The knowledge might already be there. It may just need a different door. So until next time, keep teaching with grace and trusting that learning is happening even when it doesn't show up on paper. May God guide you with wisdom and fill your days with peace. I'll see you next time in the Grace-Filled Classroom.